1879. The Wyoming high country was no place for the soft. Winter arrived in October and did not release its grip until May. It was a land of sharp granite peaks and valleys so deep the sun only touched their floors for an hour a day. The wind, it had a name out here. It was the Wyoming wind. And it did not just blow. It screamed. It tore at the sparse pines, ripped shingles from roofs, and drove snow into drifts as high as a two-story house. Law was a rumor whispered from Cheyenne. Weeks away by Good Horse. Up here, law was what a man carried in his holster, or what a neighbor agreed was right. Mostly, it was just survival. The cold was the real sheriff. It judged all men equal. It found the weak, the unprepared, and the unlucky. And it took them. It froze the marrow in their bones and left their bodies stiff for the wolves. This winter was worse than most. The old-timers said it was the kind of cold that settled deep, the kind that killed cattle standing up and made a man wonder if God had forgotten this part of the map entirely. Into this land, Clara came. She was 19, from Kansas. She knew flat land that went on forever. She knew heat that shimmered and dust that caked your throat. She did not know this. This vertical frozen world was a nightmare. She was supposed to be a bride. She had been for almost 8 hours. Her father, a good man broken by 2 years of drought and 1 year of locusts, had made a deal. He had a debt he could not pay. A man named Abner Thorne, a widower with a sprawling ranch in the Wyoming Territory, had offered to clear it. He did not want the failed farm in Kansas. He wanted Clara. The wedding was a crime committed in daylight. It took place in the cold front parlor of Abner Thorne's sprawling, empty ranch house. Thorne. He was a man carved from old, sour wood. Near 60 years of age, twice a widower, with lands that stretched farther than a man could ride in a day, and a reputation for breaking horses and hands with the same casual cruelty. His knuckles were thick, his beard stained with tobacco, and his eyes, small and dark, had looked at her with the same flat assessment he gave his cattle. Clara stood beside him, a ghost in a white silk dress her mother had worn, now altered for her. She was a ghost at her own funeral. The parlor smelled of stale cigars, old leather, and Abner Thorne himself. The preacher, a nervous man drinking Thorne's whiskey in the corner, rushed the words. Clara's father stood near the door, his hat clutched in his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. He had traded her, traded his only daughter for the erasure of a $500 debt, for seed grain, for the survival of his own failed patch of dirt. He had not met her eyes in a week. Clara felt nothing. The numbness was a mercy. She had wept for 3 days when they told her. She had pleaded. She had screamed. Now, there was only ice inside her, a cold that matched the frost on the window panes. "And do you, Clara," the preacher mumbled. She watched a single snowflake trace a meandering line down the dirty glass. It was so quiet. "Clara," Thorne's voice was a gravel pit rumble at her ear. His hand, which had been resting on the small of her back, moved. It clamped down on her wrist. The grip was not affectionate. It was ownership. It was the grip a man used on a stubborn mule, a warning and a promise. The bones in her wrist ground together. Pain lanced up her arm, sharp and sudden, cutting through the fog. She flinched. Her eyes snapped to his. "I do," she whispered. The words tasted like ash. Thorne grunted. Satisfied? He released her wrist, leaving white finger marks on her skin. The preacher pronounced them man and wife. Thorne did not kiss her. He simply pulled her arm through his, turning her toward the few witnesses, his own ranch hands, smelling of the bunkhouse and cheap whiskey. Their eyes looked her over, cold and calculating. She was just the new property, another mouth to feed, another body to warm the master's bed. Later, in the unfamiliar bedroom, he had left her. "Make yourself ready," he had ordered, and shut the door. She heard him downstairs, his voice raised, pouring another drink. She stood in the center of the room. "Ready?" The word echoed. She looked at the heavy bed, the thick furs, and she knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the mountain peaks outside, that she would rather die. She would rather be torn apart by wolves, frozen in the snow, than let that man put his hands on her again. Her escape was not a plan. It was a reflex. It was the last desperate buck of a broken animal. She did not change. The silk dress was a mockery, but it was all she had. She moved to the small bag her father had packed for her. Her hand brushed against her mother's old corset, and inside, where she had hidden it from her father, from everyone, was the small, pearl-handled derringer. It had belonged to her grandmother. It held 2 shots. She slid the small gun from its cloth wrapping and tucked it deep inside the stiff bodice of her dress, the cold metal a shocking comfort against her ribs. She waited. The house was quiet, save for the wind and the distant clink of a bottle. She opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark. She crept down the stairs, each step a cannon shot in her ears. The front door latch was heavy, oiled. It opened with a soft click. The cold hit her like a fist. She ran from the house, from the yellow square of light, into the swirling snow of the stable yard. The ranch hands were in the bunkhouse or in town. The stable was dark. She fumbled with a latch, startling a horse. It was one of Thorne's horses, a fast bay mare, still saddled from a day's ride. She did not question the luck. She pulled the reins, led the horse out into the snow, clumsy in her thin slippers and silk dress. She jammed her foot into the stirrup, hiking the heavy dress up, and threw herself across the saddle. The mare, spooked by the wind and the ghost on her back, bolted. Clara clung to the horn, gasping as the horse plunged through the ranch gate and onto the open, dark expanse. She had no map, no direction. She just pointed the horse away from the ranch, away from Thorne, and prayed. The blizzard consumed the world. It was no longer night, just a howling, suffocating whiteness. The horse stumbled, panicked in the deepening drifts, and threw her. Clara fell hard, the air knocked from her lungs. When she surfaced, gasping, the horse was gone, just the sound of its terror, swallowed by the storm. She was alone, on foot, in a wedding dress, in a Wyoming blizzard. She walked. She walked until her legs were numb stumps of wood that she had to command to move. The fine silk of her dress, now torn to rags by grasping branches and barbed wire she had not seen, was a joke. It offered no warmth. It was a shroud. Her feet were gone. She could not feel them. She fell. She crawled, her hands raw. The wind clawed at her face, her eyelashes freezing together, crusting her eyes shut. She tore them open. "Please," she sobbed, but the wind snatched the word from her mouth and threw it into the dark. She stumbled over a fallen log and rolled down a short, steep bank. She landed hard against something solid. Ice, the bank of a creek, frozen solid. She lay there, the snow piling on top of her like a blanket. This was it. This was the end. It was almost a relief. The pain stopped. The fear stopped. There was only the white, soft, suffocating peace. She was so tired. She closed her eyes, and the world went away. Luke was checking his traps. It was a fool's errand in this storm, but he had been cooped up in his cabin for 3 days, and the silence was getting too loud. The wind was a voice, and it said things he did not want to hear. He lived alone. He had for 2 years, ever since. He had built the cabin himself, high up in a draw, far from any trail. He hunted, he trapped, and he kept to himself. The folks in Laramie, the few times he went for supplies, called him the hermit. He did not care. His horse, a sturdy gray gelding named Boulder, snorted, pulling him from his thoughts. The horse tossed its head, backing away from the creek bed. "What is it, boy?" Luke muttered, pulling his scarf down. He saw it then, a patch of white against the snow that was not snow. It was wrong. It was silk. He dismounted, sinking to his thighs in the drift. He pushed his way to the creek bank. It was a woman, or a girl. She was half buried, her face pale blue, her lips the color of ash. Her hair, a rich brown, was fanned out and frozen to the ice. She was wearing a torn white dress. He stared for a long second. A body. Just another soul taken by the mountain. He should leave her. Turning her over to the law in Laramie meant questions, and he did not like questions. But as he looked, he saw the faintest, tiniest pulse in her throat, a flutter, like a trapped moth. He cursed God, the mountain, and his own bad luck. She was alive. He dug her out. She was lighter than he expected, a bundle of sticks and frozen cloth. He lifted her. She made no sound. He carried her to Boulder, who shied from the cold. Still burden. Easy, boy, easy. He mounted, pulling her across his lap, cradling her against his chest. He wrapped his heavy canvas coat around her as best he could and turned the horse for home. The ride was short, but the wind was relentless. He shielded her face with his own body, his beard freezing to her icy hair. He could feel no breath. He was carrying a corpse, but one with a stubborn, flickering heartbeat. He kicked the door of his cabin open and carried her inside. The small, one-room cabin was dark, but the embers in the stone fireplace glowed. He laid her on the thick bearskin rug before it, the one place in the room free of drafts. He piled wood onto the embers, blowing them to life. Flames roared up the chimney. The heat began to fill the small space. He turned back to her. She had not moved. He knelt, putting a hand to her face. She was so cold it burned his skin. He knew what he had to do. He had seen it with calves born in blue northers. He had saved a trapper once. Years ago, the same way. He tried to unbutton the dress. The silk was frozen solid. The buttons, tiny pearls. Impossible for his thick, cold fingers. He went to his table, grabbed his skinning knife, and returned. He hesitated for only a second. Then, carefully, he sliced the dress open. From her throat to her waist, he peeled the ruined, icy fabric away. Underneath, she wore a corset. It was a cruel thing of whalebone and steel, and it too was rigid with ice. He worked at the laces, his fingers clumsy. He cursed softly, finally cutting the laces with the knife. The corset sprang open. Tucked inside, against her ribs, was a small, pearl-handled derringer. Luke paused. He looked at the tiny, almost comical gun, then at her face. It was a lady's gun, a gun for hiding. He took the weapon, checked that it was capped, and placed it high on the mantel, well out of reach. He cut away the rest of it, the chemise, the stockings, the thin slippers, all of it frozen, stuck to her blue-white skin. He worked fast, not looking at her as a man looks at a woman, but as a stockman looks at a creature he is trying to save from the frost. When she was bare, he saw the bruises, dark, angry marks on her left wrist, a shadow on her throat, just under her jaw, that looked like fingers. He stopped. His breath hitched. He looked at the bruises, then at the ruined wedding dress. He understood. He did not know the story, but he understood the shape of it, and a cold, familiar anger settled in his gut. He shook it off. Survival first, questions later. He stripped off his own heavy coat, his flannel shirt and his union suit, down to his drawers. He pulled the thickest wool blankets from his cot. He lay down on the rug beside her, the heat from the fire scorching his back. He pulled her stiff, icy body against his. It was a shock, like embracing marble. He pulled the blankets over them both, tucking them in tight, sealing out the drafts, creating a pocket of shared air. He held her. He held this frozen stranger, his own warmth fighting her deathly cold. He rubbed her back, her arms, his rough hands chafing her skin, trying to force circulation. It was a grim, desperate intimacy. He could feel the smallness of her, the fragility of her bones under his hands. He smelled the faint, clean scent of soap beneath the ice and the fear. He closed his eyes and just held on, pouring his own life's heat into her, waiting for the first shiver. It was the only way. Clara woke to two things: warmth and the smell of wood smoke and man. Her eyes flew open. The world was blurry. A low ceiling of rough-hewn logs, firelight flickering on wood. And weight, a heavy arm across her waist, a solid, warm body pressed against her back. She was naked. The panic was instant, acidic, choking her. It was Thorn. He had found her. The wedding night, the thing she had fled, was happening. She had failed. She screamed. It was a raw, thin sound, like a rabbit in a snare. She shoved, scrambling away, tangling in the heavy blankets. She rolled and landed on the cold plank floor, the shock of it clearing her head. He was not Thorn. The man sat up from the bearskin rug. He was big, dark-haired, with a beard thick with frost that was now melting in the heat. He wore only his drawers, his chest broad and scarred. His eyes were not cruel like Thorn's. They were nothing. They were just tired, deeply tired. Clara's eyes darted around the small room. Fireplace, table, cot, and on the table, next to a half-eaten loaf of bread, was a knife. She lunged for it. She grabbed the wooden handle and spun, pressing her back against the rough-cut table. She held the knife out, her hands shaking so badly she could barely keep her grip. The heavy blanket pooled around her waist. "Stay back!" she hissed. Her voice was cracked, raw. "Do not touch me!" The man slowly raised his hands, palms out. He did not get up from the rug. He just watched her. "Easy," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "I am not going to hurt you." "Where am I? Who are you?" "Name's Luke. This is my cabin. You are in the Laramie Mountains. I found you by the creek. You were near frozen." She looked down at herself, naked under the blanket she had managed to pull around her shoulders. She saw the pile of her silk rags near the hearth, steaming as they thawed. "You," she stammered, her teeth chattering violently now. "You undressed me?" "Your clothes were ice," he said, his voice flat, without emotion. "It was that, or I bury you in the morning. Your choice." The bluntness of it stopped her. He was not apologizing. He was not threatening. He was stating a fact. He looked at the knife. He looked at her, trembling, her eyes wide with terror, her knuckles white on the handle. He sighed, a sound of deep weariness, and rubbed a hand over his face. "My shirt is on the peg by the door. Put it on. You are freezing again." She did not move. "I am not going to touch you," he said again, his voice slow, measured. "I am going to stand up. I am going to put wood on the fire, and I am going to make coffee. You can hold the knife the whole time." He moved slowly, deliberately. He stood, and she flinched at his height. He was tall, built solid like the trees outside. He ignored her, walking to the fireplace, turning his back to her. He added 2 logs to the fire. Sparks flew. Clara's arm trembled. The knife felt heavy. She looked at this stranger, at the cabin that was a cage, and at the howling white fury outside the single window. She had escaped Abner Thorn, only to be trapped by the mountain, and by this man. "Who are you?" she asked again, her voice smaller. Luke turned from the fire. He looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes tracing her face. "I am just a man," he said, "same as you, just trying to survive." He did not ask her name. He did not ask where she came from, or why she was in a wedding dress in the middle of a blizzard. She did not lower the knife. He did not move to take it. The fire crackled. The wind howled. And the two of them, 2 damaged, wary creatures, just watched each other across the small, warm room. The blizzard held for 3 days. It was not a storm, but a siege. The wind did not stop. Not for an hour. It was a high, thin scream that worked its way through the chinking of the cabin logs, a constant reminder of the white death outside. For those 3 days, they lived in the small, 10 by 12-foot space. Clara had stopped shaking, the knife resting on the table, within her reach but no longer in her hand. She wore his shirt. It was heavy wool, smelling of wood smoke and clean sweat, and it hung on her like a sack. The sleeves rolled up 5 times. It was the warmest thing she had ever worn. On the first morning, she had stood by the door, looking at the solid wall of white. "I will leave," she said, her voice hoarse, "when the storm breaks." Luke had nodded, not looking at her. He was pulling on his heavy boots. "It might be a while," he said. He did not ask her to stay. He did not ask her to go. He just accepted it, as he accepted the weather. He had given her the bearskin rug by the fire. He took the cot, the one tucked in the coldest corner, with only 2 thin blankets. The cabin was his whole world, built with his own hands. The logs were unplaned pine, still weeping a little sap near the hearth. It was simple. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its construction rough but solid. It did not smoke. A small table, 2 3-legged stools, and the cot were the only furniture. Pegs on the wall held his few clothes, a string of snowshoes, and a heavy buffalo coat. In the corner, shelves were stocked with necessities: sacks of flour, beans, coffee, a keg of salt, and twists of dried tobacco. Cured hides were stacked in another corner, their smell earthy and sharp. It was a small, tight, male space, but the fire made it a refuge. The light was golden, against the constant shrieking whine of the wind. The crackle of the logs was a sound of defiance. It was the only warm place in 1,000 square miles, and they were trapped in it together. Their days fell into a silent rhythm, a dance of 2 wary animals forced to share a den. Luke would rise before the first gray light, moving with a quietness that was unnerving in a man his size. He would stir the embers, add logs, and put the heavy coffee pot on the hob. The smell of it boiling was the only gentle thing in the morning. He would pull on his coat and hat, take his rifle, and step out into the white hell. He was never gone long, an hour, maybe 2. He would return, his beard caked in ice, stamping the snow from his boots. He would check his traps, always empty, and spend time in the small lean-to. The rhythmic, sharp thwack of his axe splitting firewood the only proof of his labor. Clara made herself small. She stayed by the fire. She found his meager supplies and did the only thing she knew how to do. She cooked. She took the hard, jerked venison and boiled it for hours with a handful of dried beans until it was a thick, passable stew. She mixed flour and salt and water and cooked flat, dense biscuits in the cast-iron skillet. They ate at the small table, in silence. The scrape of her tin spoon against his tin plate was deafening. They never looked at each other, not directly, but they watched. She watched him when he thought she was not looking. She watched his hands. They were large, scarred, the knuckles split and healed over. They were brutally capable. She had seen them split an 8-inch log with one clean strike. She had also felt them, in that first, frozen moment of waking, holding her with a heat that was almost terrifying. He was a man of absolute physical confidence. But his eyes were old. They were gray, like the winter sky, and held a deep, settled sadness she could not name. He watched her. He watched her hands, pale and fine-boned. As she stirred the pot, they were hands that had never done this kind of work. He watched her as she stared into the fire, her profile etched by the light. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty that was bruised and terrified. She moved like a deer, ready to bolt at any sudden sound. He took care to move slowly, to place the logs on the fire gently, to not slam the door. He did not know her name, and he did not ask. She was just the girl. A piece of frozen trouble the storm had dumped on his hearth. The second night, the nightmare came. Clara slept, but it was not rest. She was back in Thorne's house, the parlor, the smell of whiskey and stale cigars, the crushing grip of his hand on her wrist, the way his small, dark eyes had assessed her, not as a person, but as a mare he was about to breed. She was in the upstairs room, the heavy bed looming, and the door handle was turning. She screamed. It was not a loud sound, but it was piercing, a sound of pure, animal terror. She woke herself with it, sitting bolt upright on the bearskin, tangled in the wool shirt, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. In a second, he was there. He had crossed the dark cabin in 2 strides. He knelt in front of her, his hands grabbing her shoulders. "You are safe," he growled, shaking her slightly. "Wake up, you are here." The grip, the sudden movement, the man looming over her in the dark. It was the dream. It was Thorne. "No!" she shrieked, and she began to fight. She clawed at him, her nails raking his arm. "Do not touch me! Get off me!" She was hysterical, seeing only the monster from her memory. Luke did not see a woman. He saw a spooked horse, blind with panic. He grabbed her wrists, pinning them. "Stop it! Stop! It is me! Luke, you are in the cabin! You are safe!" But the word safe meant nothing. She was trembling so violently her teeth rattled. It was a deep, systemic shudder, a vibration of absolute, soul-deep terror. And Luke felt it. He felt the fragile bones in her wrists. He felt the trembling that was not from cold, but from a place he knew. He let go. He released her so fast it was as if her skin had burned him. He scrambled back, putting 3 feet of space between them. Clara collapsed, pulling her knees to her chest, rocking back and forth, sobbing into the wool shirt. They were not loud sobs, but the quiet, gasping, broken sounds of someone who had held it in for too long. Luke stood, breathing hard, his own hands shaking. He looked at the red scratches on his forearm, but he did not feel them. He only felt that trembling. It was the same way Sarah had trembled. He retreated. He went to the fireplace and sat on the stool, his back to her. He did not put a log on the fire. Though it was dying, he just sat in the growing cold, his forearms on his knees, and stared at the glowing embers. For a long time, the only sounds were her quiet, choked weeping and the endless howl of the wind. Finally, her sobs subsided into shudders. He was my husband," she whispered to his back. Luke did not move. He did not turn. He just listened. "I was married to him. Yesterday, my father, he owed him money. A lot of money. Our farm in Kansas. It was gone. This man, Mr. Thorne, he paid the debt, and I was the price." She rubbed her face, her voice raw. "I ran before he could. I ran. I think he will kill me for it. He is not a man. He is not a man you run from." Luke stared at the embers. He thought of Abner Thorne. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory knew it. A hard man. A cruel man. He unbuttoned the cuff of his shirt and rolled up the sleeve. In the dim light, he looked at the fresh scratches. Then he looked at the scar on his chest. It was an old one. A puckered, angry white line that ran from his collarbone down toward his heart. "I had a sister," he said. His voice was flat. "Dead. Younger than me, Sarah. She married a freighter from Cheyenne. Seemed like a decent man. Gave her presents. Smiled a lot." He touched the scar, a gesture he did not know he was making. "I went to visit them, maybe 6 months after. She had a bruise on her face. Said she fell. A week later, he broke her arm. Said she fell down the stairs. I was young, full of fire. I went to their house. I told her to pack. He came home." He paused, the memory playing out in the dark cabin. He was drunk. He laughed at me. He told me she was his property, to do with as he pleased. So I hit him. I hit him until he stopped moving. He got me with a boot knife, right here. He tapped the scar. I nearly bled out, but I did not care. I grabbed Sarah, and I took her home, back to our pa's ranch. I thought I had saved her. He leaned forward, the firelight catching the bleakness in his eyes. She was quiet, too quiet. She would not talk about it. She just sat and stared. We all thought she just needed time. Time to heal. He picked up a small twig from the woodpile and threw it into the embers. It flared, bright, and died. About 2 weeks later, I was out mending fence. I came back. She was gone. We found her shoes on the bank of the Laramie. The river was high. They never found her. He fell silent. Clara had stopped crying. She was just watching his broad, shadowed back. "I learned something that day," Luke said, his voice barely a whisper. "I saved her from him, but I did not save her from what he did to her. I did not know how. I beat the man, but the fear, it was still in her, and it just ate her from the inside out." He stood up, and for the first time, turned to look at her. She was watching him, her eyes wide in the gloom, her face stained with tears. They were not strangers anymore. They were two people in a room, marked by the same kind of violence. He looked at her, trembling on the floor, and he saw his sister. "You should sleep," he said, his voice rough. "He is not here. I will not let him get you. No one is coming through that storm." He turned away, went to his cot, and lay down, facing the wall. The next day, the silence was different. It was not the silence of strangers. It was the silence of a shared truce. The blizzard had lessened, the wind dropping from a scream to a steady, mournful moan. The light outside was brighter, a flat, shadowless gray. After a silent breakfast, Luke pulled on his coat. The wind dropped. "I am going to check the high traps." I will fetch some more water." Clara said the bucket was low. He nodded. "Do not go past the creek line. The drifts are deep." The air outside was shocking. So cold it felt like breathing in needles, but it was still. Clara wrapped one of Luke's spare blankets around her shoulders over the wool shirt. She took the bucket and the axe, not to chop, but to break the ice on the creek. She felt weak, but the cold air felt good. Clean. It scoured the cabin's scent of fear and smoke from her lungs. She made her way to the bank where he had found her. The creek was a ribbon of black, fast-moving water in a world of white. She knelt, broke the new ice near the edge, and dipped the bucket. As she stood, she heard a sound, a grunt, a splash. She looked upstream, 20 yards away, around a bend thick with snow-laden pines. She saw him. Luke. He was stripped to the waist. The rumors of sun she had seen through the window had been enough for him. Cabin fever, she guessed. He was kneeling by the creek, his back to her, splashing the freezing black water onto his face and chest. Clara froze. She should have turned. She should have run back to the cabin. She did not. She watched. He was strong, not just big. The muscles in his back and shoulders moved under his skin like coiled ropes. The white, puckered scar on his chest was stark against his skin. He scrubbed at his face, ran wet hands through his dark hair, and then stood, bracing his hands on his knees, breathing deep. He was the opposite of Abner Thorne. Thorne was soft, thick in the middle, his power coming from his name and his money. This man's power was in his arms, his back, in the solid way he stood on the frozen earth. He was a part of the mountain. He was alive. And as she watched him, a jolt went through her. It was so sudden and so sharp it made her gasp. It was heat, a deep, pulling, shocking warmth that started low in her belly and spread through her limbs. It had nothing to do with fear, or debt, or survival. It was want. It was the first thing she had felt for herself in so long. She had almost forgotten the sensation. It terrified her more than the blizzard. He must have heard her. He grabbed his shirt from a branch and turned, his eyes finding her instantly. Clara dropped her gaze, her face burning, the heat visible as steam in the cold air. She grabbed the bucket and fled, slipping and stumbling in the snow, back to the cabin. That night, the cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. It was too small, too hot, too quiet. The wind had returned, and it clawed at the roof. They ate the stew, the silence stretching so tight it hummed. Every move he made. She felt, every time she breathed, he seemed to listen. She was intensely, painfully aware of him, of the way his shirt felt on her skin, of his smell, of the memory of his body, half naked by the creek. After they ate, he went to his usual spot on the stool, pulling a whetstone from his pack. He began to sharpen his skinning knife. The sound was a rhythmic, metallic shing, shing, shing. It grated on her nerves. She was sitting on the bearskin, her knees drawn up. She was trying to mend a tear in the knee of his spare trousers, her fingers clumsy with the crude needle. She could not stand it, the sound, the silence, the waiting. She was waiting for Thorn to come. She was waiting for the storm to end. She was waiting to die, or to be dragged back. She was so tired of being afraid. She looked at Luke. He was bent over the knife, his face cast in shadow, the firelight catching the concentration in his eyes. He was the man who had saved his sister too late. He was the man who had held her, naked, to save her life. He was the man she had seen by the stream. She stood up. The shing sound stopped. He did not look up, but his hands stilled on the stone. She walked across the 3 feet of floor that separated them. She stood directly in front of him, so close her knees almost touched his. He slowly, very slowly, lifted his head. His gray eyes met hers. They were wary. She was trembling, but it was not the terror from the nightmare. It was something new. It was a quake, a decision. She had been property. She had been traded. She had been cargo. She would not be cargo anymore. She would choose, even if it was a mistake. It would be her mistake. "Just do it, cowboy," she whispered. Her voice was so low he barely heard it. He frowned, not understanding. "What?" I cannot," she swallowed, her throat dry. "I cannot have his hands be the last thing. I cannot have that fear be the only thing." She was not making sense, but she did not know how else to say it. She reached out a shaking hand and touched the scar on his chest, just above his shirt. "I do not want to be afraid anymore." He understood. His eyes widened, just slightly. He understood what she was asking, and he saw the terror and the desperate, heartbreaking bravery in her face. He put the knife and the stone on the hearth, very slowly. He stood up. He towered over her. He looked down at her, his face a mask of old pain. "Girl," he started, his voice rough. "I am not—" "I know," she said. She grabbed the front of his shirt, just as she had seen him grab branches. "Please." He looked at her, at this broken, beautiful, desperate thing, and all the coldness, all the loneliness of the last 2 years, cracked. He kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was all the ice and fear and rage of the last week. It was his guilt and her terror, crashing together. His beard was rough against her skin, his mouth hard. She kissed him back, a desperate, drowning gasp, clinging to him. She began to shake. The trembling started in her legs and moved up. The old terror, the memory of Thorn, the feeling of being taken. He felt it. He felt her go rigid in his arms, her hands beating weakly against his chest. It was Sarah. It was all happening again. He broke the kiss, his own breath ragged. "No," he growled, more at himself than at her. He was going to stop. He was going to push her away. But she would not let him. She was crying, but she held on to his shirt. "Do not stop," she pleaded. "Please, do not stop." He looked at her, and his heart broke. He had to steady her. He had to stop the trembling, or it would consume her. He put his hands on her shoulders and turned, pushing her back against the solid cabin wall. The rough-hewn logs bit into her back through the thin wool. It was a shock. It was solid. It grounded her. He pressed his body against hers, pinning her there, not with violence, but with weight, with heat, with presence. He held her head between his hands, forcing her to look at him. His face was inches from hers. The firelight flickered in his dark, intense eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked. His voice was raw, desperate. "You have to be sure." He was giving her the choice, the one his sister never got, the one her father had stolen. Clara looked into his eyes, and she saw his pain, his guilt, and she saw her own way out. She did not say yes. She reached up, tangled her fingers in his hair, and pulled his mouth down to hers. It was not about love. It was about survival. It was a desperate, primal need to feel human, to reclaim the territory that had been stolen. His hands moved from her face, down her body. Learning her hands explored him, his solid back, his shoulders. It was a frantic, clumsy, desperate coupling, fueled by grief and a profound, aching loneliness. He was rough, but he was not cruel. She was terrified, but she was not unwilling. It was the first human touch that was not about debt, or ownership, or death. It was two ghosts, in a box of warm wood, howling against the storm, trying to prove to each other that they were still alive. And for a few desperate, breathless moments, they were. The morning after was louder than the storm. Silence in the cabin had changed. Before, it had been the wary quiet of two strangers. Now, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a secret. Clara woke first. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cabin was cold. She was on the bearskin rug, alone. He was on his cot, his back to her, a solid, unmoving ridge under his blankets. She felt a sharp, confusing ache. It was not the terror she associated with Thorn. It was a new, hollow soreness, a physical reminder of what had passed, and with it, a hot flush of shame. She had begged him. She had pulled him to her. She, who had fled a man's touch, had demanded it from another. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons on the mended trousers he had given her. His wool shirt still carried his scent. It felt different now. It was no longer a shield. It was an accusation. He rose a minute later. He did not look at her. He moved with a stiff, deliberate anger. He pulled on his boots, kicked the logs in the fireplace with more force than necessary, and went outside. Clara flinched at the slam of the door. She was alone, and the warmth of the night felt 1,000 miles away. He had taken what she offered, and now he despised her for it. She was what Thorn had tried to make her, a thing to be used. When he returned, he carried firewood stacked to his chin. He dropped it into the wood box, the crash making her jump. He still did not look at her. He grabbed the coffee pot, filled it, and jammed it onto the hob. The storm broke. He said, his voice was flat, dead. The same voice he'd used when he spoke of his sister. I can leave," she whispered, her throat tight. Luke finally looked at her. His gray eyes were cold, closed. "You will not last 10 minutes. The wind stopped, but the temperature dropped 20 degrees. It is clear, and it is killing. You stay until the thaw." It was not an invitation. It was a sentence. He left again, this time with his rifle. He was gone for 6 hours. Clara did not just cook. She scrubbed. She scrubbed the skillet until her knuckles were raw. She scrubbed the table. She swept the floor. She tried to erase the night, to erase her own scent from the air, to make herself invisible. When he returned, a rabbit hanging from his belt. They ate in the humming silence. They were two people on opposite sides of a canyon. The night had happened, and there was no bridge back. They lived that way for a week. The silence was a third person in the room, a cold ghost. They perfected the art of not touching. They passed each other in the 10 by 12 space like magnets repelling. If his hand brushed her arm as he reached for the salt, they both recoiled. He slept on the cot. She slept by the fire. Neither of them slept well. Then the thaw came. It was not spring, but a reprieve. The sun shone, bright and watery. The deep drifts began to crust and sink. The creek, which had been a black ribbon, widened, its roar growing louder. The work of survival had to resume. "The chinking is shot," Luke said one morning, pointing to the south wall. "The wind tore it out. We fix it, or we freeze when the next storm hits." Clara followed him outside. He showed her how to mix the mud with dried grass, how to pack it into the spaces between the logs. It was cold, filthy work. Her fine Kansas hands, already chapped, began to crack and bleed. She did not complain. She worked, her head down, grateful for the labor. Their hands were inches apart, packing the mud, his broad and scarred, hers small and bleeding. He saw. He stopped, went inside, and came back with a pair of his work gloves. They were stiff, massive. He tossed them at her feet. "Use these," he growled. "You are no good to me with broken hands." She put them on. They were a shield. But inside, they were worn soft from his use, and they were warm. He decided she was a liability. She was weak, she was slow, and she could not protect herself. His anger at the night, his guilt over Sarah, manifested as a harsh, impatient tutelage. "You are going to learn," he said one afternoon. He shoved his rifle into her hands. It was heavy, the metal cold. It smelled of oil and death. "I do not want to," she said, her voice small. "I do not care what you want. Thorn is out there. Wolves are out there. I am not always here. You will learn." He set up a tin can on a log, 30 yards away. "Put the stock to your shoulder. Tight." She did. He clicked his tongue. "No, not like a lady holding a teacup. Put it in, jam it in. Let the wood become your bone. If it is loose, it will break your shoulder." She flinched at the thought. She seated it. "Now, line up the sight. Breathe out. Do not pull the trigger. Squeeze it until the shot surprises you." She closed her eyes and pulled. The explosion was deafening. The rifle kicked like a mule, slamming into her shoulder and knocking her back a step. She cried out, dropping the gun in the snow. Her shoulder was on fire. The can was untouched. "I told you," he said, his voice void of sympathy. "I told you to hold it tight. You did not listen. Pick it up." "It hurts," she whispered, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "Good. Pain teaches." He looked at her, and his face softened, just for a second. "It will hurt worse if you miss. Pick it up. Again." She did. She fired and missed. She fired and missed. Her shoulder was a mass of purple bruising. She hated the gun. She hated him. "You are thinking about the kick," he said. "You are thinking about the noise. You are flinching before you even shoot. Stop thinking. Just look at the can. Make everything else go away. Make the world just you and the sight and the can." She was angry now. Her shoulder throbbed. He was a cruel, silent brute. She lifted the rifle, jammed the stock into her ruined shoulder until the pain made her eyes water. She breathed out. She looked at the can. She squeezed. The explosion. This time, the can jumped, spinning off the log. There was silence. "Again," he said. He put the can back. She hit it. She lowered the rifle, her arms shaking. She looked at him, expecting nothing. "Good," he said, just one word. It was the first time he had looked at her without anger or guilt in his eyes. It was just good. The word was a balm on her shoulder. He taught her to ride, not the way she had fled Thorne's ranch, a panicked passenger. He put her on Boulder, his gray gelding, and taught her to ride. "He is not a chair," Luke said, adjusting the stirrup. "He is alive. Feel him. He can feel you. He knows you are scared. Stop being scared. Be the boss." The horse was huge, powerful, but after the rifle, the horse was easy. She learned the feel of his muscles, the shift of his gait. Luke would lead the horse, then let go of the rein. She would ride in small circles in the clearing. One afternoon, Boulder, bored, dipped his head and sneezed, a huge, wet spray that covered her front. Clara gasped, wiping her face. You awful beast!" she sputtered. Luke, who was leaning against a pine, made a sound. It was a short, rusty bark. She froze. She looked at him. He was covering his mouth, but his shoulders were shaking. He was laughing. It was the first time she had heard him do anything but speak in a monotone. The sight of it, the sound of it, was so shocking. She smiled. Then she found a clump of soft snow and threw it at him. It was a bad throw, weak and wide. It disintegrated in the air. He stopped laughing. He looked at her. The moment of warmth was gone. But as he turned back to the cabin, he said, "Your throw is as bad as your shooting was." It was not a compliment, but it was not anger. It was something new. The cabin walls seemed to grow wider. They still did not speak of that night, but they spoke of other things. He told her how to read the weather in the clouds. She told him about the flat, endless fields of Kansas. They found moments of truce. She was mending his shirt by the fire, her head bent, the light catching the brown and gold in her hair. He was oiling the rifle, his hands moving with practiced, efficient grace. He looked up, and his eyes rested on her. She felt the look, as tangible as a touch. She looked up. Their eyes held, for 1 second, 2. In his, she saw the man from that night, the one who had held her against the wall, his eyes full of a desperate, shared pain. In hers, he saw the woman by the creek, her face flushed, her eyes full of a life he thought had been beaten out of her. They both looked away. The fire crackled, suddenly too loud. The work, the shared survival, was building a bridge over the chasm of that night. They were becoming not lovers, but partners, a man and a woman, bound by a storm and a shared, unspoken trauma. It was a fragile, tender thing, this new peace. It was, of course, destined to be shattered. The man arrived on a Tuesday, late in the afternoon. His name was Silas Croft, but everyone in the territory called him Squint. He was a wizened, leather strap of a man who ran a mail and supply route for the high country hermits and trappers. He came once every month or two, if the snows allowed. Luke heard the jingle of his mule bells first. "Inside," he ordered Clara. His voice was sharp, urgent. "Do not make a sound." She scrambled into the cabin, hiding in the darkest corner, her heart pounding. Luke met Squint in the clearing. "Luke!" The old man cackled, dismounting. "Still alive. I see. Tougher than a boiled owl. I got your coffee. And your mail." "Just leave it." Luke said, "What is the news from town?" "Town is jumpin'," Squint said, spitting tobacco juice onto the snow. "Everyone is talking about Abner Thorne." Clara, her ear pressed to the crack in the door, went cold. "What about him?" Luke asked, his voice casual. "That new bride of his. Plucked her right out of Kansas. Pretty little thing. I hear, well, she up and run on him. On their wedding night. Can you feature it? Just vanished into that blizzard we had 3 weeks back." "Fool girl," Luke said, leaning against a tree. "Froze, no doubt." "That is what I reckon," Squint agreed. "But Thorne? He does not think so. He is hotter than a $2 pistol. Got men riding every trail. And he put this up." Squint reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of paper, a flyer. He handed it to Luke. Luke took it. He unrolled it. From inside, Clara could not see it. She only saw Luke's shoulders go rigid. She saw his hand, the one holding the paper, clenched so tightly the paper crumpled. $50, Squint said, his voice full of awe. 50 gold dollars for information on one girl, Clara Bethpage, or Thorne, I guess, 19 years old, brown hair, blue eyes. Says here she is smart and manipulative, and likely armed. Luke stared at the paper. He saw the badly drawn sketch. It looked nothing like her, but the words were her, Clara. You see a girl like that, Squint said, nudging Luke. You might be tempted to keep her for yourself, but $50, that buys a lot of peace. Thorne will find her. He always finds what is his. If I see her, Luke said, his voice a low rumble, I will let you know. He handed the flyer back. I do not want this trash in my camp. Squint shrugged, tucked the paper away, and finished unloading the coffee. He traded a few more bits of gossip, but Luke was silent. The old man finally mounted up. You keep your eyes peeled. Luke, Thorne is not a man to cross. I know, Luke said. He watched until the mule was out of sight. He stood in the clearing for a long minute, the crumpled flyer still in his hand, though Squint had given it back to him. No, Squint had given him a new one. He walked to the cabin. He kicked the door open. Clara was standing by the table, her face as white as the snow outside. He did not speak. He walked to her and threw the flyer on the table. Reward, $50, for the return of Clara Thorne, née Bethpage. She stared at it. Luke, she whispered. You lied, he said. His voice was not loud. It was worse. It was the dead, cold calm of the mountain peaks. I did not know how to tell you. You came into my home. You ate my food. You used me. No, she cried, the word torn from her. It was not that night. It was not a lie. You brought him here, he roared, the control finally breaking. He swept his arm across the table, sending the tin plates and her mended trousers scattering. You brought Abner Thorne to my door, a man like that. He was breathing hard, his face pale, the scar on his chest standing out. He was not seeing her. He was seeing his sister. He was seeing the freighter from Cheyenne. He was seeing the man he had failed to stop. Luke, I was afraid. She wept, backing away. He is powerful. He owns judges. He owns the law. I did not tell you. I did not tell you to protect you. Protect me? He laughed, a bitter, terrible sound. You protected me by making me a target, by hiding in my home while he offers gold for you. They will find you, and they will find me, and they will hang me for a horse thief and a kidnapper. I have to go, she said, the panic setting in. She saw it now. She had not just ruined her own life. She had ruined his. She had brought the monster to his door. She ran to the cot, grabbing the thin blanket. I will go. I will leave now. I will tell them I never saw you. He watched her, his face dark. His anger was a shield, protecting the raw, terrified part of him that saw his world ending. He had built this life, this quiet, empty fortress, to keep the memory of Sarah at bay. And this girl, this Clara, had torn it down, log by log. He felt used. He felt tricked. He thought of their night, of her desperation. He thought it was about them. He was a fool. It was about her, using his strength to hide. Luke, please, she begged, clutching the blanket. It is dark. Just let me have the blanket, and some food. He strode to her, ripped the blanket from her hand, and threw it to the floor. You will take nothing, he said, his voice laced with ice. You came with nothing. You will leave with nothing. You cannot, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. It is night. It is cold. I will die. You should have thought of that before you lied, he said. He grabbed her arm, his fingers biting in, just as Thorne's had. She flinched, a cry of pain. He let go instantly, staring at his own hand, horrified. "Get out," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Luke, get out." He pointed to the door. "Get out of my home, go!" She looked at him. The man who had taught her to shoot, who had laughed, who had held her as if she were the only thing in the world, was gone. This was a stranger, his eyes full of the same cold fury she had fled. She had escaped Thorn, only to be killed by his ghost. Clara stopped crying. Her face went still. She pulled the dignity of her old life around her like a shroud. She walked past him. She did not look at him. She opened the cabin door. The cold night air rushed in, a physical blow. She stepped out into the dark. She did not have a coat. She did not have food. She wore only his shirt and his trousers. Luke watched her go. He watched her stumble once in the snow, a small, dark shape. Then she was gone, swallowed by the pines. He slammed the door. The bar dropped with a heavy, final thud. Silence. The cabin was his again, empty, safe. He was shaking. He went to the fire, his rage so potent it made him sick. He sat on the stool, staring into the flames. He had done the right thing. He had cut out the infection. He had saved himself. The wind moaned outside. He sat there for an hour, 2. The cabin was so quiet. He had forgotten how quiet it was before her. He had forgotten how much he hated it. His eyes fell on the table. Among the scattered debris, there was a tin cup, her cup, the one she drank her coffee from. He had scrubbed it clean himself, but he noticed something on the rim, something he had overlooked. It was a faint, waxy reddish smear. He had seen her, just once, 2 days ago, pull a tiny, battered tin from the pocket of her ruined dress. She had rubbed something on her finger, and then on her lips. A ghost of color. A desperate, small attempt to be the girl she had been, not the survivor she had become. He had thought it was brave. Now, that faint smudge on the cup caught the firelight. It looked like a drop of blood. It was an accusation. He thought of her face when he grabbed her arm, the look of betrayal, the way she had flinched. He had done the one thing he swore he would never do. He had become the man with the boot knife. He had become Thorn. His anger evaporated, leaving only a vast, cold, sick emptiness. "Sarah," he whispered. He had saved his sister from the freighter, but he had been too late. Now, he had just taken Clara, who had survived Thorn, survived the blizzard, survived him, and he had thrown her out into the night to die. He had not saved himself. He had just murdered her. What have I done? He leaped to his feet. He grabbed his heavy buffalo coat, his rifle, and snatched the half-empty bottle of whiskey from the shelf. He tore the door open and plunged into the darkness, bellowing her name into the uncaring wind. The cabin door slammed shut, the heavy bar falling into place with a sound of finality. Luke stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. His hands were shaking. It was done. He was safe. His cabin was his own. He had expelled the poison, the lie, the woman who had brought the shadow of Abner Thorn to his door. He had cut her out, just as a surgeon cuts out gangrene. It was the right thing. It was the only thing. He sat on the stool, staring at the fire, and waited for the relief. It did not come. Instead, the silence of the room, once his comfort, rose up and began to suffocate him. It was a thick, heavy, absolute quiet, broken only by the wind's low moan. The cabin had never felt so empty. It was not just empty, it was hollowed out. He had won. He had driven out the danger. He was alone, just as he had been for 2 years. His rage, which had been a fire in his belly, began to cool, leaving a sick, cold ash. He had yelled at her. He had grabbed her. He had seen her flinch from him just as she flinched from the memory of Thorn. He, Luke, had become the thing he despised. His gaze drifted to the table. In his fury, he had swept it clear. Plates and his mended trousers lay scattered. But there, upright, having miraculously survived, was her tin cup. He stared at it. It was just a cup, but it was her cup, and on the rim, he saw it, the faint, reddish, waxy smudge, the tiny, desperate trace of her lip stain. It was the smallest, most human, most feminine thing in his harsh, rough-hewn world. It was the sign of the woman who had tried to feel like a woman again. Not just a survivor, the woman who had, 2 days ago, shyly mended his trousers. The woman who had, last week, hit the tin can with his rifle and looked at him with such fierce, stubborn pride. And he had taken that woman, in her thin wool shirt and borrowed trousers, and thrown her out into a 20-degree night to die. He was not protecting himself from Thorn. He was murdering her to protect his own cowardice. He was not saving his own life. He was repeating his sister's death. He was the freighter. He was the river. He was the thing that let the fear win. "Sarah," he whispered. The name was a confession, a prayer. No. He did not just stand. He exploded. He grabbed his heavy buffalo coat from its peg. He grabbed the rifle. He grabbed the bottle of whiskey from the shelf. Not for him, but for her. He did not bother with the door bar. He kicked the door open, the wood crashing against the outer wall, and ran into the night. He saddled Boulder in a frantic, fumbling haste, his frozen fingers clumsy on the cinch. He did not take time to think, to plan. He just rode. "Clara!" he bellowed. His voice was ripped away by the wind. "Clara!" He rode toward the creek, the place he had found her the first time. The moonlight was brilliant, turning the snow-covered world into a landscape of blinding white and shadows as black as wells. The cold was a physical thing, a creature with teeth that bit at any exposed skin. He found her tracks. They were small. Stumbling, they led away from the creek, upstream, toward the high country. She was not trying to get to a road. She was just running from him. He spurred Boulder, the horse plunging through the chest-deep drifts. "Clara!" He followed the tracks for an hour. They led up a steep incline, a narrow game trail he used for his high traps. The snow here was treacherous, piled in deep drifts against the rock face. He was not thinking about the mountain. He was thinking only of the small, dark shape he had last seen, walking into the woods. He pushed the horse harder, up the last steep switchback. He heard the sound before he felt it. It was not a loud crack, like a rifle. It was a deep, guttural groan. It was the sound of the mountains shifting, of 1,000 tons of snow and ice giving way. "No," he whispered. He looked up. The moonlight caught it. The entire upper ridge was moving. A white wave, a solid wall of snow, was detaching itself. The avalanche. "Back!" he roared, pulling on Boulder's reins. The horse screamed, rearing, its eyes white. There was no time. The roar was deafening. A freight train of white death coming down the mountain. Luke did not even have time to curse. The wall hit them. It was not like being buried. It was like being struck by a solid object, a fist the size of a house. He was ripped from the saddle. He felt Boulder go down, a terrible horse scream swallowed by the noise. Then it was just chaos, a churning, suffocating, crushing whiteness. He was turning, tumbling, unable to breathe, his lungs filled with ice. He felt a sharp, searing pain as his shoulder struck a rock or a tree buried beneath the snow. Then the world stopped moving, and everything went dark. He woke to silence, a ringing, painful silence, and pressure. He was buried. Panic, hot and acidic, flooded him. He could not move. He was encased in snow that had set like rock. He could not breathe. He thrashed, a single, convulsive movement, and his head broke the surface. He gasped, sucking in the painfully cold, clear air. He was alive. He clawed his way out. The snow was packed tight. It took him 10 minutes, his arms screaming in protest, his shoulder a dull, throbbing fire, to pull himself free. He stood, shaking, in the moonlight. The world was changed. The trail was gone. The ridge was gone. There was just a new, gentle slope of white, littered with shattered pines and the dark shapes of rocks. "Boulder," he whispered. He looked around, frantic. 20 yards away, a dark shape snorted and struggled. The horse, he was alive, buried to his neck, but alive. Luke stumbled and slid down the slope to his horse, digging with his bare, raw hands to free the animal's legs. Boulder was terrified, but miraculously unbroken. Luke leaned his forehead against the horse's warm, trembling neck, his own body shaking so badly he could barely stand. He had almost died. He had been spared. And in that moment, the last of his rage, his fear, his guilt, was scoured away by the ice. He had been given a second chance. He looked up at the changed mountain. Clara! He had been following her. She was up here, somewhere, under this. The realization hit him harder than the avalanche. He had not just thrown her out. He had sent her straight into a death trap. He pulled himself into the saddle. He had no plan. He had no tracks. He had nothing. He just pointed the horse uphill, toward the place he thought she might have gone. He rode, not calling her name, just scanning the shadows, his eyes aching from the cold. He searched for 2 hours. The moon began to sink. The air grew colder, the killing cold that comes before the dawn. He was hopeless. She was gone. He had lost her. Just as he had lost Sarah, he had failed again. He stopped Boulder on a high ridge, looking down at the devastation. He had failed. He was about to turn back, to go to his empty cabin and live with the ghost of what he had done, when he saw it. It was nothing, a shadow within a shadow, far across the ravine, under a dark granite overhang, a place the avalanche had overshot. He thought he saw something move. It was probably a wolf, drawn by the sound. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard. He nudged Boulder forward. He crossed the ravine, the horse slipping on the icy rocks. He dismounted, rifle ready. He walked toward the dark overhang, a small, shallow cave worn into the rock. "Clara," he said. His voice was a dry croak. No answer. He stepped inside, out of the moonlight. It was black. He fumbled in his coat for his flint and steel. He found a piece of tinder. He struck. The small spark flared. She was there. She was not moving. She was curled in the tightest ball he had ever seen, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around her shins. She was covered in a fine layer of snow, blown in by the wind of the avalanche. Her face, tucked against her knees, was the color of a fresh bruise, a deep, terrible blue-purple. He dropped the flint. He dropped the rifle. He touched her shoulder. She was not cold. She was ice. She was as stiff and frozen as the first time he had found her. "No, no, no, no!" He grabbed her, pulling her into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. He lifted her. He ran from the cave, stumbling, carrying her to the horse. He threw himself into the saddle and pulled her tight against his chest, wrapping his own buffalo coat around her small, stiff body. He spurred Boulder. He rode like a madman, the horse galloping, sliding, plunging down the treacherous slope. He did not care if they fell. He only cared about the small, frozen thing in his arms. He kicked the cabin door off its one remaining hinge. He did not put her by the fire. He tore the blankets from his cot, threw them on the bearskin rug, and laid her down. He piled everything on top of her. Every blanket, every skin, his own coat. It was not enough. She was too cold. The core of her was frozen. He did not hesitate. He did not think about last time. He stripped off his boots and shirt and slid under the mountain of blankets with her. He pulled her stiff body against his, molding his own living warmth to her back. He rubbed her arms, her legs, his hands rough, chafing, desperate. He forced her frozen hands under his arms, against his skin. He tucked her icy feet against his belly. He had to swallow. Clara, you stay. Do you hear me? You stay. Do not you dare leave. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Clara, I was a fool. I was afraid. You stay. You fight. He held her all night. He held her as the fire roared, as the first gray light of dawn crept through the broken doorway. He held her, pouring his own heat, his own life, his own desperate will into her. He did not sleep. He just held on, waiting for the first shiver. It came with the sunrise. It was a small, violent tremor that ran through her, then another. He held her tighter. That is it, he whispered, his voice raw, his own teeth chattering. That is it. Fight! Fight me! She began to shake violently, her whole body convulsing as the warm blood fought its way back into her frozen limbs. It was a terrible, agonizing process. She moaned, a low, animal sound of pure pain. I know, he soothed, rubbing her back. I know. It hurts. I have got you. I am here. It is Luke. I have got you. He held her for another hour, until the shivers subsided into a fine tremble. She turned in his arms. Her eyes opened. They were blurry, unfocused. She stared at his face, inches from hers. She was not afraid. She was just confused. Luke, she whispered. Her voice was a dry rustle. Tears sprang into his eyes, hot and sudden. He had never been so relieved in his life. He closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. I am here, he choked out. You came, she whispered. I am sorry, he said, the words tearing out of him. Clara, I am so sorry. I was a monster. I lied, she whispered, her own eyes filled with tears, which slid, hot, onto her cold cheeks. I lied to you. I put you in danger. I do not care, he said, his voice fierce. He pulled back so he could see her. I do not care about Thorn. I do not care about the $50. I only care that I did the same thing. I let the fear win. I am sorry. Clara, I am so sorry. She looked at him, at the raw guilt in his eyes, at the exhaustion, at the tears on his rough beard. She saw the man from that first night, the one who had told her about his sister. She lifted a trembling hand, her fingers still numb, and touched his face. Luke. It was the first time she had said his name with such tenderness. It broke him. He gathered her closer, and he just held her. They did not speak. They lay tangled in the blankets on the floor, and for the first time, they both cried. Not in fear or in rage, but in a profound, shattering relief. They had both, in their own way, been brought back from the dead. They lay there until the sun was high in the sky. He finally broke the silence. We cannot stay here, Clara. She pulled back, the fear instantly returning to her eyes. Thorn, he agreed. Squint will be back. Thorn will send men who are not old and half blind. This is the first place they will look. We cannot hide. So I have to run again, she said, her voice flat. No, Luke said. He sat up, pulling the blankets around her. You are done running. We are done running. He stood, pulling on his trousers, his movements stiff. His shoulder ached from the avalanche. What do we do? She asked, her small voice coming from the bundle of fur. He turned to her. His face was set, resolute. We fight. How? You said it yourself. He owns the law. He does not own everyone. Luke said, I know a man in Laramie. Elias Thorn, no relation. He is a lawyer, an honest one. He helped me after Sarah. He understands. We are going to Laramie. We are going to tell him the truth. We are going to tell a judge that you were forced, that the marriage was a debt contract, not a union. We are going to get you free." She stared at him. "He will kill you. Luke, he will see you in the street and shoot you." "Let him try," Luke said. The cold, dead look was gone from his eyes. In its place was a fire she had never seen before. "I am tired of hiding from ghosts. Yours and mine." He offered her a hand. She took it. He pulled her to her feet, wrapped in the blanket. She looked around the cabin. It was a wreck. The door was broken. The floor was a mess. But it was the only home she had. Her eyes fell on the pile of rags near the hearth. The remnants of her wedding dress. The shreds of silk he had cut from her frozen body that first day. She walked over to them. She picked up the largest piece. What was once the bodice. It was stained with mud and pine resin, a symbol of her humiliation. "It is time," she said, her voice quiet. She walked to the fireplace and dropped the silk onto the hot embers. Luke came to stand beside her. He did not speak. They watched it together. The silk did not burn quickly. It curled, blackened at the edges. And then, with a small, blue flame, it flared and melted away. It turned to black, foul-smelling ash. They watched until it was completely gone. It was a funeral. It was a cleansing. Clara turned to him. "My name is Clara." She said, "Just Clara." He nodded. "Clara." He looked at her, standing in his oversized shirt, wrapped in a blanket, her hair wild, her face bruised by the cold. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "We leave tomorrow, at first light," he said. That night, the cabin was different. He had fixed the door as best he could, bracing it with a log. The room was warm again. They sat at the table, eating a quiet meal of biscuits and jerky. There was no tension. The shame was gone. The silence was not a weapon, it was a comfort. When it was time to sleep, he laid out the blankets on the bearskin rug for her. "I will take the cot," he said. He turned, but her hand on his arm stopped him. "Luke." He looked at her. "Stay," she whispered. It was not a plea. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. He looked into her eyes. The fear was gone. The desperation of that first time was gone. There was just her. He sat on the rug beside her. He took her face in his hands. He did not kiss her. He just looked at her. "Are you sure?" he asked. He had asked her this before, against the wall, in the grip of fear and desire. She smiled, a small, slow smile that lit her entire face. "I have never been more sure of anything." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the collision of before. It was slow. It was tender. It was a discovery. It was two broken people, finally finding the healing they thought was impossible. He laid her down on the bearskin, and in the warm, golden light of the fire, they made love. It was not a frantic coupling. It was a long, slow, tear-filled act of devotion. It was not about survival. It was not about reclaiming. It was about love. He held her all night, her face tucked into his neck. Outside, the wind howled, and the mountain waited, and the shadow of Abner Thorne crept closer. But inside the small cabin, for the first time, two people who had been dead for a long time were, finally, completely, and incandescently alive. They left the cabin at the first sign of dawn, a thin gray-blue line in the east. The world was utterly still, the air so cold it felt brittle, as if the sky might crack. Luke had packed jerky, the last of the biscuits, and 2 blankets. He carried his rifle. He had given Clara the small derringer, the one he had taken from her frozen dress, now cleaned and recapped. She had tucked it back into her waistband. "Where is your coat?" she had asked him, as he wore only his heavy wool shirt. He had just looked at her, then at the heavy buffalo coat he had wrapped around her shoulders. It swallowed her. The sleeves hung a foot past her fingers. "I run hot," he said. He helped her onto Boulder's back. The horse was the only way she would make it. He took the reins. "We will be slow." But we will be steady. You watch the ridges, I will watch the trail. The journey down from the high country was a descent into hell. The trail was not a trail, but a memory, buried under 4 feet of snow. What the avalanche had not scoured, the wind had redrifted. For 2 days, Luke walked, breaking the trail, while Clara rode. He was a force of nature, his shoulders set, his eyes constantly scanning. He did not seem to feel the cold. They did not speak. Sound was a danger. A word could carry for a mile in the still air. Their world was reduced to the crunch of his boots in the crust, the snort of the horse, and the high, thin cry of a hawk overhead. The first night, they did not risk a fire. They found a hollow beneath a massive, snow-laden spruce, the branches creating a dry, sheltered space. They huddled together, Boulder standing over them like a guardian, breaking the wind. They shared a biscuit, their hands touching in the dark. "I am afraid," she whispered, her voice muffled by the collar of the coat. "I know," he said. His arm was around her, solid as the mountain. "So am I. Sleep." He did not sleep. He sat, the rifle across his knees, and watched the moon shadows, listening to the dark. He was listening for the sound of other horses, for the click of a rifle hammer. The second day, they reached the foothills. The snow lessened, turning to patchy, dirty ice and thick, frozen mud. They were exposed. Late in the afternoon, Luke stopped. He put a hand on Boulder's neck, silencing the jingle of the harness. "Get down," he whispered. Clara slid from the saddle, her legs stiff. "What?" "Riders." He pulled her and the horse off the trail, down into a shallow, frozen creek bed, behind a stand of skeletal cottonwoods. "Do not move, and do not, for any reason, make a sound." They waited. Clara's heart felt like a drum against her ribs. She heard them before she saw them, the clop of hooves on rock, laughter, a man's rough voice, carrying on the wind. 2 men rode past, not 30 yards away, on the trail above them. They were not trappers. They were heavy, wearing gun belts, their faces dark with stubble and cold. "I tell you, Hank, $50 is $50, the first one said. "I find that little whore. I am taking her back to Thorne myself. He can have what is left." "If the wolves have not had her first," the other grunted. "This is a fool's errand. She is froze solid up there. Let us go back to town. The whiskey is good, even if the women ain't." They laughed. They spurred their horses, heading west, away from the high country. Clara was shaking so hard she had to bite the inside of her glove. These were the men from the flyer. Luke watched them go, his face expressionless, carved from stone. He waited a full 5 minutes after the sound had faded. "They are not looking up here anymore," he said, his voice quiet. "They think you are dead, or in town. They are heading back to Laramie." They are his men," she whispered, horrified. "Yes." He helped her back onto the horse. "Now we follow them." They entered Laramie not as saviors, but as fugitives. It was a town of mud, wood, and smoke. The thaw had turned the main street into a river of brown sludge, a foot deep in places. Loggers, ranch hands, and trappers crowded the boardwalks, their voices loud. The town smelled of wet animals, coal smoke, and frying fat. They were a spectacle. Luke, tall and wild, his beard untrimmed, his rifle in his hand, and Clara, a small, bruised woman swimming in a man's buffalo coat, her face pale with terror. The respectable folk, the men in hats and the few women in bonnets, stopped. They stared. They whispered. Clara saw their faces. She saw the women look at her, then at Luke, and their eyes hardened with judgment. Harlot, runaway, whore. She wanted to turn, to run back to the silence of the mountain. Luke's hand settled on her arm. "Keep walking," he said, his voice low. keep your eyes on me." He led her past the saloon, past the land office, to a small, single-story building with a faded shingle. Elias Thorpe, attorney at law. The office was small, cluttered, and blessedly warm. A pot-bellied stove in the corner glowed red. Books were piled on the floor, on the desk, on the chairs. A man looked up as they entered. He was older, in his late 50s, with thin hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked at Luke, and his face was a mixture of surprise and profound weariness. "Luke," he said, setting down his pen. "I had hoped I would not see you in here again. What is it this time? Cattle rustling? Or did you just punch the marshal?" "Elias," Luke said. He took off his hat, a gesture of respect she had never seen him make. "I need your help." "You always need my help," the lawyer said. He looked at Clara, his gaze sharp, taking in the coat, the bruises, the fear. "And who is this?" Luke looked at Clara. He would not speak for her, not now. Clara pushed the heavy sleeve back from her hand. "My name is Clara," she said, her voice shaking but clear. I am the wife of Abner Thorne." Elias Thorpe dropped his pen. It clattered on the desk. He took off his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Oh, Luke," he sighed. "Of all the trouble in this territory, of all the hornets' nests, you had to kick the biggest one. Abner Thorne?" "She is not his wife," Luke said, his voice a low growl. "The law says she is. I saw the certificate filed myself. The marshal has a warrant for her arrest, for theft, a horse and saddle." "He bought me, Mr. Thorpe," Clara said, stepping forward. Elias looked at her. "My father in Kansas. He owed Mr. Thorne $500. He could not pay. Mr. Thorne offered to erase the debt in exchange for me. He did not ask for my hand. He made a trade. I was not courted. I was sold." The lawyer stopped rubbing his nose. He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Go on." He was cruel. From the moment the preacher finished, he hurt me. He put his hands on me. He told me I was his property. I ran that night, during the blizzard. I would have died. Luke found me. He saved my life." Elias looked at Luke. He remembered another girl, years ago, Luke's sister, Sarah. He remembered the bruises on her. He remembered Luke, younger then, sitting in this same office, his face a mask of rage and grief, begging him to do something, anything, to punish the man who had driven her to the river. The law had done nothing. "Abner Thorne is a powerful man. Child," Elias said, his voice softer. "He has the governor in his pocket. He is the law, in his part of the county." "Then the law is wrong," Luke said. "This is not the mountain. Luke, we cannot fix this with a rifle." "I am not asking you to fix it," Clara said. "I am asking you to make it right. Is there no law, anywhere, that says a person cannot be sold?" Elias looked at her for a long time. He saw the iron in her spine. She was not Sarah. She had not broken. "Yes," he said slowly. "There is. A contract made under duress is no contract. But it is a thin reed. Clara, he said, she said defense. A judge will see a legal marriage certificate. And your testimony. It might not be enough." "It has to be," she said. Elias nodded, his mind made up. He stood. "Judge Harlan is in town. He is a fair man. He does not like Thorne, but he respects the law. I will file an immediate petition for annulment, based on coercion and duress, but this will be public. Abner will know you are here within the hour. He will not wait for the judge." "We know," Luke said, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol, the one in his belt. "That is what we are counting on." The words spread through Laramie faster than fire in a dry prairie. "She is here, the runaway bride. She is with the hermit. Luke, they are at the lawyer's office." When they stepped back onto the boardwalk, the street was different. It was no longer just busy. It was watching. Men stopped their conversations. Faces appeared in the windows of the saloon, in the mercantile. Clara's terror returned. "Luke." "It is all right," he said. "Walk with me. We are going to the hotel. Elias is getting the judge." They walked into the center of the street, the mud sucking at their boots. And then he appeared. Abner Thorne. He rode out from the livery stable. At the far end of the street, he was not alone. He was flanked by the two men they had seen on the trail, the ones who had called her a whore. Thorne sat on a magnificent black stallion. He was dressed in a fine black coat, his beard trimmed. He looked like a governor, like a king. He looked at the muddy street and the low-rent townsfolk with contempt. Then his eyes found Clara. He spurred his horse, and the three of them trotted forward, parting the crowd, stopping 10 yards from Luke and Clara. "Woman," Thorne boomed. His voice was used to command. "You will come to me now. Your little adventure is over." Clara stopped breathing. The voice, the command. She felt the muscle memory of her wedding day, the urge to obey, to cower. Luke stepped half an inch, putting himself between her and Thorne. "She is not going anywhere with you, Thorne." Thorne's eyes, small and dark, shifted to Luke. He looked him up and down. The wild hair, the rough clothes, the stubborn mountain man stance. He smiled, a thin, cruel smile. "This," he said, as if to the crowd, "is what you ran for, a filthy trapper, a half-wild hermit? You left my home, my wealth, for this?" He spat in the mud. "I am taking my wife. She stole my horse. She is a thief. Step aside, boy, or I will have you buried where you stand." "She is not your wife," Luke said. His voice was not loud. It was deadly calm. "She is a free woman." "She is my property," Thorne roared, his composure cracking. He was not used to being defied, especially not by someone he considered trash. He nodded to the man on his right, the one who had talked of $50. "Hank, take her. Shoot the man if he moves." The man named Hank smiled. He had been waiting for this. He swung down from his horse, his hand hovering over his holster. "Come on, little lady. The boss is calling." He lunged for Clara. He never reached her. Luke moved. He was not a barroom brawler. He was a hunter. He did not shove the man. He hit him. Once, a short, brutal strike to the throat. Hank collapsed, choking, gasping, his gun forgotten. The other man, the one who had wanted to go for whiskey, was smarter. He saw what happened. He drew his pistol. He never leveled it. Luke's pistol was already in his hand. The sound of the shot was a single, flat, deafening crack that echoed off the false front buildings. The second man stared, his face a mask of surprise. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of his chest. He sat down in the mud, looked at the hole, and then fell over, dead. It was over in 2 seconds. The street was silent. Smoke drifted from the barrel of Luke's pistol. Thorne was frozen, his face purple with rage and shock. His power, his hired muscle, was gone. One choking, one dead. You killed him," Thorne stammered. "He drew on me," Luke said, his voice cold. He did not look at Thorne. His gun was still in his hand, pointed at the man on the ground. The town marshal burst out of his office, shotgun in his hand. "What in God's name? Luke, put that gun down!" "He drew on me, Marshal," Luke said calmly. "Ask anyone." Elias Thorpe pushed through the crowd. "Marshal, this man," he pointed at Thorne, "was attempting to forcibly abduct my client, Clara Bethpage. Mr. Luke here was defending her, and himself." The man named Hank had gotten to his feet, still choking. He saw his partner dead in the mud. He saw Luke, his gun still smoking. He saw the marshal. He was a hired gun, paid for intimidation. not to die. He stumbled, grabbed his horse's reins, and fled, scrambling into the saddle and galloping out of town. Now, Abner Thorne was alone. He sat on his great black horse, his fine coat spattered with mud. He was surrounded by a silent, watching town. He looked at Luke, and his eyes were full of murder, but he could not draw. He could not shoot an armed man in front of the marshal. His power was useless. This is not over," he hissed. "It is," Elias said, stepping forward. "Judge Harlan is waiting in the land office. We are having a hearing. Right now. You are welcome to attend. Abner, as a witness." The hearing was a shamble. It was held in the land office, which was packed shoulder to shoulder with every curious citizen in Laramie. The women, the ones who had glared at Clara, stood in the back, their faces tight with disapproval. Judge Harlan, a stern man with a white beard, sat at the land agent's desk. Mr. Thorne," the judge said, his voice flat. "You claim this woman as your wife." "She is my wife," Thorne snapped. "I have the certificate, signed by a preacher. She is mine, by God and by law. She ran, and this animal, kidnapped her." "That is a lie," Elias said, his voice cutting through the anger. "She was not married. Your Honor, she was sold." A gasp went through the room. Mr. Thorpe, that is a serious accusation," the judge warned. "It is a serious crime," Elias countered. "I call Clara Bethpage." Clara stood. The room was silent. She looked small, swallowed by the buffalo coat, but her voice was clear. She told them everything. She told them about her father's farm in Kansas. She told them about the $500 debt. She told them about the offer from Thorne. "He did not ask me to marry him," she said, her eyes on the judge. "He told my father he would take me, and the debt would be gone. I was not asked. I was told. I was payment. When I arrived, he treated me as such, as property. I ran, because I would rather freeze than be his." The judge listened. He looked at the hard, angry face of Abner Thorne. He looked at the pale, bruised, but steady face of the girl. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, "is it true you paid a $500 debt for this woman's father?" "It was a dowry," Thorne blustered. "A gift to the family. It is tradition." "It is bribery," Elias said. "It is coercion. This woman did not consent to this marriage. She was forced into it by the threat of her family's financial ruin. This was not a wedding. It was a transaction. And this territory, Judge, does not recognize the buying and selling of human beings." The women in the back were no longer whispering. They were watching. They had all known hard times. They had all known fear. The judge stroked his beard. He looked at Thorne. "Abner, I have known you a long time. You have built a great deal in this territory, but you have done it with a heavy hand. This smells bad. It smells of arrogance. It smells of a man who thinks his money can buy him anything, including a wife who does not want him." "This is an outrage," Thorne shouted. "The law is on my side." "The law," the judge said, his voice rising, "is meant to protect, not to enslave. I find that this union was entered into under extreme duress and coercion. It is not valid. I declare the marriage between Abner Thorne and Clara Bethpage to be annulled. She is free." For a second, the room was absolutely silent. Thorne's face was a mask of utter, unbelieving fury. He had lost in public. He had been shamed by a hermit and a girl. He looked at Clara, his eyes promising murder. He looked at Luke. But he could do nothing. He was beaten. Without a word, he turned, shoved a man out of his way, and stormed out of the office. The crowd parted for him, and they heard the frantic galloping of his horse as he fled Laramie, his dignity in tatters. The room emptied slowly, the people muttering, eager to spread the news. Clara and Luke were the last to leave. They stood on the boardwalk, alone. It was over. It had begun to snow. Not a blizzard, but a soft, gentle fall of clean, white flakes. They landed on her hair, on his shoulders. She looked at him. He looked at peace. His face, which had been a mask of stone and ice for so long, was calm. "It is over," she whispered. "It is over," he said. She began to shake. The reaction of the last 3 weeks, the fear, the cold, the trial, all of it crashing down on her. She did not just hug him. She fell against him, her face pressed into the rough wool of his shirt, her arms wrapped around his waist as if he were the only solid thing on earth. Luke held her. His arms, which had been so strong, so brutal, were now gentle. He wrapped them around her, holding her tightly, his chin resting on the top of her head. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he had found his sister's shoes by the river, he felt his own heart settle. The snow fell, covering the mud, the blood, and the past, blanketing the street in a perfect, quiet white. 1 year. It was a long time. It was a lifetime. They had not stayed in the old cabin. After Laramie, after the snows melted, Luke had looked at the small, rough-hewn room and felt the walls closing in. It was a place of ghosts. It was the place he had failed his sister, the place he had almost failed Clara. It was a fortress, and he was tired of being under siege. "I know another place," he had said one morning, as the spring thaw turned the world to mud. "Where?" "West, farther than Thorn will ever ride. A valley I found years ago. Good water, good timber, protected." She had only packed one thing, the tin cup with the faint, waxy smear on the rim. Everything else, they left. The journey took them 3 weeks, deeper into the spine of the mountains. They crossed ridges that scraped the sky and forded rivers that were still choked with ice. He led Boulder, and Clara rode, and she saw a land that few had ever seen. When they finally descended into the valley, she gasped. It was not a high, harsh draw like the old place. It was a bowl, perhaps 5 miles across, protected on all sides by sheer, 1,000-foot granite cliffs. A single, narrow pass, the one they had just navigated, was the only way in or out. A river, wide and clear, wound through the meadow floor. The grass was knee-high, aspen groves shimmered green, and tall pines marched up the slopes. It is like Eden," she whispered. "It is home," he said. They built the new cabin together. He cut the trees, but she had helped him peel the bark, her hands learning the simple, satisfying work. He notched the logs, his axe moving with a skill that was almost art. But she had helped him mix the chinking, her hands covered in mud and straw. This cabin was different. It was larger. It had 2 rooms, a true luxury, one for living, and a small one for sleeping. It had a real porch, facing south, to catch the winter sun, and it had windows, 2 of them, made from glass panes he had packed all the way from Laramie, wrapped in blankets. He had spent his last dollars on them. "A woman needs light," he had said, as if it embarrassed him. Clara had cried. They had built a life. As the summer sun warmed the valley, they had built a home. A year passed. The snows came, deep and quiet, sealing the pass, and they were alone. But it was not imprisonment. It was peace. The snows melted, and the spring returned, bringing a carpet of wildflowers to the meadow. Clara changed. The girl from Kansas, the terrified bride, was gone. Her hands were calloused now, her skin browned by the sun, but the softness had not left her. It had simply settled, deepened. She had a garden, behind the cabin, in a patch of rich river-bottom soil. She grew potatoes, beans, and onions, and in a small, defiant plot by the front door, she grew flowers, wild columbine she had transplanted from the cliffs. and a few precious seeds of marigold she had traded a trapper for. She learned to bake bread, real risen bread, in the small cast-iron oven Luke had hauled in. The cabin, which always smelled of his wood smoke and leather, now also smelled of her baking, of yeast and warmth. Luke changed. The hermit, the man who lived with ghosts, had found a purpose beyond survival. He was a provider. He still hunted. He still trapped. His line of traps ran the perimeter of their valley. The furs he gathered were prime, and once in the spring and once in the fall, he would make the long journey to a settlement to the west, a different town, where no one knew of Abner Thorne. He traded his furs not just for coffee and salt, but for glass jars for Clara, for flour, for a small bolt of blue calico cloth, and once a thin book of poetry, which he gave to her, his face averted, as if he were handing her a loaded pistol. They were not rich, they were not easy, but they were happy. Their happiness was a quiet thing. It was not built on grand declarations. It was built on the small, steady rhythms of their life. It was the silence of the evening, as she sat mending a shirt and he sat oiling his rifle, the firelight playing on them both. It was the shared look when a hawk cried overhead. It was the way he would cut the wood just the length she preferred for the cook stove, and the way she would always have a hot cup of coffee ready when he came in from the cold. They never spoke of Abner Thorne. They never spoke of the wedding or the trial, or the man who had died in the Laramie Street. They did not need to. Those ghosts had been buried under the snow of Laramie and left behind in the old cabin. But they had a ritual. Every night, after the simple meal was done, after the dishes were cleaned and the fire was banked low, they would go to the small sleeping room. They would lie down in the bed he had built, a sturdy frame of pine that did not creak. Under the quilt she had sewn, the room would be dark, the only light the moon on the snow outside the window. And in the quiet, his hand, calloused and scarred, would find hers, smaller but just as strong. He would link his fingers with hers. It was not a prelude to passion, though that came too, a thing of slow, deep comfort, as natural as breathing. It was a promise. It was the anchor. It was the wordless, nightly confirmation. I am here. You are safe. I will not let you go. They would fall asleep like that, their hands clasped between them. The second winter in the valley arrived, and it was a hard one. The snow came early, in October, and it did not let up. The drifts piled high against the cabin, and the world was reduced to their small, warm box, and the white, silent wilderness outside. One afternoon, in the deep cold of January, Luke was checking his trap line near the pass. A new storm was blowing in, the sky a low, bruised purple. He was thinking of turning back when he saw the tracks. They were small, too small for a wolf, too small for a man. He froze. He remembered other tracks, the ones he had followed in the dark, his heart sick with dread. Clara's tracks. These were smaller, and there was a drag mark. He unslung his rifle. He moved quickly, his snowshoes making a soft, hissing sound. He followed the tracks from the pass, down into the valley, for almost a mile. They were erratic, stumbling. Whoever it was, they were done. He found the bundle under a drift-covered pine. It was not a woman. It was a child. A little girl, no older than 4, maybe 5. She was wrapped in a thin, ragged shawl. Her hair was a pale, corn silk blonde, matted with ice. Her face was a pale, waxy blue. She was not moving. Luke cursed, the word a plume of white steam. He dropped to his knees. He had seen this before. He had seen her like this. He pressed his fingers to the child's neck. He waited. Nothing. He pressed harder. And he felt it, a flutter, a pulse so faint, so thin, it was barely a thread of life. He did not wait. He tore the child from the snow, ripping her free. He tore open his own heavy coat and shoved the small, frozen body inside. against his wool shirt, against his own skin. She was a block of ice. "Hold on," he growled. "To her, to the mountain, to God. You hold on." He ran. He did not walk. He ran the mile back to the cabin, his snowshoes sinking, his lungs burning, the storm howling at his back, a pack of wolves chasing him. He kicked the door open. Clara was standing by the hearth, a wooden spoon in her hand, her face placid. She saw his face, and the spoon clattered to the floor. "What?" "Get the blankets," he roared. "Now, by the fire." He tore the child from his coat and laid her on the bearskin rug, the one he had brought from the old cabin. She was a tiny, pathetic, frozen thing. Clara did not ask questions. She saw the blue face, and she moved. They worked together, a grim, practiced team. They had done this before, but this was different. This was not a woman. This was a child. They cut the frozen rags from her. They brought warm water, not hot, and bathed her limbs, rubbing life back into them. And when she was clean, and still terribly, terribly cold, Luke looked at Clara. "It is not enough. She is too small. She cannot fight." Clara understood. She stripped off her own heavy wool dress, down to her chemise. She scooped the child up, wrapped her in the driest blanket, and got under the pile of furs with her. She gathered the small, icy body against her own, skin to skin, a mother holding a newborn. Luke knelt beside them, piling more blankets on top, tucking them in. He fed small, hot sips of broth, mixed with a drop of whiskey, into the child's mouth. They worked all night. They did not speak. They were two parts of the same machine, focused on one thing, the tiny, flickering pulse. Toward dawn, the child shivered. Clara gasped and held her tighter. "Luke, she is shivering." The child's eyes opened. They were blue and wide, and utterly, blankly terrified. She saw the strange woman, the strange man, the strange room. She opened her mouth, and she screamed. It was a high, thin, terrified wail. It was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. They called her Annie. She did not tell them her name. She did not speak at all for the first week. She had been abandoned, left by a desperate family, perhaps, on the pass, to freeze or be found, a sacrifice to the winter. She would not let Clara out of her sight. She would not eat unless Clara ate first. She hoarded biscuits under her small pillow. Luke was wary. He watched the child, his face closed. She was a complication. She was another mouth, another heart, another thing to lose. "Clara," he said one night, as they stood on the porch, watching the stars. The child was asleep inside, her first peaceful sleep. We are not people who can, we live rough. This is no life for a child." "What life is?" Clara asked, her voice quiet. She turned to him. The moonlight was soft on her face. "To be left in the snow, to be sold for a debt, to be told you are property?" He was silent. "She was left, Luke," Clara said. Her voice was fierce, the same fierceness he had heard in the Laramie courtroom. "She was discarded, thrown away, because she was a burden, just like I was, just like your sister was." She took his hand. We did not just run here to hide, did we? We came here to be free, and we are. I cannot be free and turn my back on someone who is still trapped." She looked at the cabin door. "This is why, this is the reason. All of it, the running, the avalanche, the trial. It was all so we could be here, right now, for her, to give her what we never had, a choice, a home." He looked at her, at this woman who had once been a terrified girl, now stronger than the granite cliffs around them. He saw the tears in her eyes. He saw the iron in her spine. This was not about redemption for her past. It was about defining her future. He pulled her into his arms. "She will need her own bed," he said, his voice rough. It was a year later. The valley was covered in a fresh, clean blanket of snow. It was afternoon, the light a pale gold, the air still. Inside the cabin, Annie, now a bright, chattering 5-year-old, was asleep on her small cot. A doll Luke had carved from pine wood clutched in her hand. Clara stood in the doorway. She wore a dress of blue calico and an apron. She watched her husband. Luke was in the clearing, splitting the last of the autumn wood. He was bare-chested, his back to her. The cold did not seem to touch him. Steam rose from his shoulders. He would swing the axe, a clean, perfect arc, and the log would split with a satisfying thwack. He was all strength and power and solid, dependable grace. He was her mountain. He was her home. He paused, stacking a piece, and turned to wipe the sweat from his face. He saw her watching him. He smiled. It was a slow, easy smile, one that reached his gray eyes, chasing all the shadows away. Clara smiled back. The world was perfect. The snow was falling. The child was safe. The man she loved was here. The memory of that night, the desperation, the fear, the night she had begged him, came back to her. But it was not a bad memory. It was the memory of their beginning, of the moment the ice had broken. She leaned against the doorframe, the cold air soft on her face. "Just do it again, cowboy," she called out, her voice soft but clear in the still air. He heard her. He stopped, the axe in his hand. He looked at her, his head cocked. He did not understand. She laughed, a real, warm laugh that the girl from Kansas had never known. The kiss. "Luke," she clarified. He understood. He dropped the axe. It fell, unheeded, into the snow. He did not walk. He ran. He crossed the clearing in 10 long, powerful strides, his feet kicking up clouds of white. He bounded onto the porch and did not stop until he had her. He swept her up, his arms wrapping around her waist, lifting her clean off her feet. He pushed her back against the rough cabin wall, the same way he had all that time ago. But this time, there was no fear. There was no desperation. He kissed her. He kissed her as the snow fell, as the child slept, as the mountains stood witness. He kissed her with all the passion of that first desperate night, and all the deep, quiet love of the 1,000 nights that had followed. He kissed her like it was the first day, the last day, and every day in between. And Clara held on, her face warm, her heart full. The winter was all around them, cold and white and sharp, but in their small valley, in their small cabin, their hearts would never be cold again. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We love sharing these real, raw, and emotional tales with you. Let us know what you thought in the comments, and tell us where in the world you are listening from. We would love to connect. Please be sure to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts.